You listen to Rudy Radio, powered by Rude Rangers Entertainment. I'm Terra Renee from African American Women in Cinema organization, and this is Talk with Terra, a show that highlights fantastic filmmakers, artists, and entertainers, all from all walks of life. We're committed to introducing you to individual organizations and projects of which you're not necessarily aware. And we do this with the intention of uplifting, empowering, and enlightening you. If you can, please share this episode on your social media. We also love it if you text your friends and ask them to tune in. Feel free to ask questions, make comments, and/or share your thoughts at any point during the show. We promise to respond. Today, we have an incredible guest, one of my favorite documentarians in the world. We have Mr. Terrence Gordon, filmmaker, just a powerful storyteller, a good person. So grateful that he is my colleague in the industry, and we're here to talk to him about the great things that he has done and what he's currently doing. So let's welcome Terrence. Terrence Gordon, how are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you for such an incredible introduction. I feel special.
You are
Thank
special,
you.
Terrence. You are special.
Yeah.
So please share with the audience what drew you into filmmaking?
Certainly. When I think back, and for me, a lot of times you hear the stories from, filmmakers like, well, my parents bought me a high 8 camera and I was running around in the backyard and shooting my siblings and, but that wasn't the story for me. Filmmaking sort of started for me before I even realized that it did. And what I mean by that is, when I left, I was born and raised in England, and I had left England at the age of 5 to go to my parents' country, which is South America, Guyana. And when we moved there at the time in '74, there wasn't widespread television, right? And there was only later 2 TV stations. And one of those stations, which I came to find out later, believe it or not, was brought in or paid for by Alfredo Versace, because he used to go to Guyana all the time. And he said, I helped this guy Rex McKay put up his TV station because they needed, the money to do it. And I was like, Rex McKay? I know Rex McKay. They're the ones, that's how we got television. And we used to make these antennas with PVC pipes so that we can kind of get a signal, and not knowing that Alfredo Versace is the person that purchased the satellite dish that allowed for that to happen years ago. But going back to, where it sort of started for me was seeing some films on VHS, which my parents had introduced me to. And one of those was Cornbread Earl and I. Cornbread Earl and Me,
classic,
with Lawrence Fishburne, and a young Lawrence Fishburne, and some others. And that was when I discovered the power of cinema and storytelling. Now, again, being so young at that age, I didn't realize what I was seeing, but I just knew that this medium sort of moved me, that I was impacted by the scenes and the storytelling of what I was seeing. And then Kramer versus Kramer, which was another movie that for some reason as a kid, I just kind of connected with. And funny enough, many years later, when I end up going to film school, Kramer versus Kramer is one of the films that we studied at NYU. And I just thought, isn't that kind of crazy, right? But yeah, so it started as a kid being, just connected to the medium in the sense of stories, sort of melancholy type stories, for some reason resonated with me. The drama of it, I think with Cornbread Earl and Me was just to do with how they shot things in slow motion during a very emotional scene. And I think, that sort of planted a seed. And then as I grew older, even though, most of my world also as a kid was kind of like in the aviation space because my dad was in the military, and I was exposed to aviation, and I sort of pursued that as well. But once I became older, I came to the United States and went through corporate America, decided that I wanted to go back and study. And I went to NYU and in the director's program, and I studied film directing for film, video, and television. And that sort of gave me the basis of, or the foundation of what I needed. I wasn't exactly self-taught at that point. However, watching films like Saving Private Ryan and looking at the behind the scenes and Spike Lee's movies, and it's like, oh, that's what the director does, and this is what the writer does, and I had met a guy, I think it was Stephen Stockage, I believe his name was, like, if I have it correctly. He wrote No Retreat, No Surrender, which was Claude Van Damme's first movie, and it made a big splash in the world, right? And he was running a camp, and the reason I ran into them is because I was very involved with martial arts and jiu-jitsu, and I did it on a competitive level. And I ended up going to this action filmmaking camp that the De Pascalis had ran. And so I met all these filmmakers, and they did stunts and flipping cars and blowing up stuff and jumping off buildings, and it was this incredible action filmmaking camp. And so once I went through that, I said, so, like, how do you get this done? And he's like, well, you got to start with a script, and he started to teach me about script writing, and I would write terrible scripts and send it to him, and he's probably thinking this guy's got no hope. But I was just kind of getting my grounds, and this was again a little bit before NYU. And funny enough, while I was still working in corporate America, because like I said, I started much later in this game, every time my boss needed something, I would try to make a video out of it. And one time we had Steve Ballmer, who was the president of Microsoft, and Bill Gates at Morgan Stanley, because I was an integration engineer. And they were doing this big presentation at Morgan Stanley when the Pocket PCs were developed. And so I made this Mission Impossible video to deliver the CD to the fourth floor auditorium. And because I just had to be making stuff, the best way I can. And I think my bosses realized, and they're like, maybe you can just go to school and just make sure you cover your work. So I'll jump on the train from Midtown, head down to NYU, take my classes, come back, finish my work, and I did that for 2 years until I completed the program. And but in the midst of doing that, a friend of mine said, I have a television show in Rye, New York. It's called Home Television. And, if you want to direct, you can come out there. And so I did. And it was a different kind of directing, right? It was this, technical director, these multi-cameras, interview style. And it was disastrous for me because I knew nothing. Right. So I went out there and I said, oh my God, but she gave me a shot. And when with doing all of that stuff, I was like, I need to go to school and get some of the foundation for this stuff. And that's what kind of led me to NYU, that started to bring in my own sensibilities into it. And then once I graduated NYU, I continued my studies with people like Judith Weston, who wrote The Director's Intuition, which is an incredible book. And and the rest was history. I just started doing lots of music videos and commercials, and my first movie I made was Avatar: Life After Addiction, which did get wide release, just so you know, on Amazon, and it got pirated. And made about $100,000, and I can tell it made $100,000 because it got pirated, and I got an email to buy my own movie, and it showed 100,000 purchases at $1, and I made zero on it because it got pirated on an online festival. And I made that movie with 26 actors in New York and myself. as crew of one,
wow,
which was insane. But I learned so much from it, and so every bit of it was worth it.
Wow. Well, tell us. That's amazing. What an amazing story. Just quick question: how long was Avatar that you made?
It was 45 minutes. I released it on I think it was an Australian, I believe it was an Australian festival that was there. So, wow. And and it got pirated, and eventually I put it on Amazon, then I took it down. So, wow, it wasn't a great movie, but I learned a lot from it.
Well, we'll be right back after these messages. You're listening to Talk with Terra, presented by African American Women in Cinema, right here on Rudy Radio.
I am Madame Francois, and I'm introducing my new luxury skincare brand that's available to you at an attainable price. Discover my beauty secrets, luxurious, effective ingredients with proven results and a price tag that doesn't break the bank. Come indulge with me at lesmadamefrancois.com.
Confetti, international Formula One driver. I spent to get to Long Island Telecom before they closed. I need to get one of these fantastic deals that Long Island Telecom has, because you can't beat the price anywhere else. Oh, get away from that car. What are you doing? Freaking kids playing with the car out there. Anyway, I'm glad I got here. Wait, what do you mean you're closing? I gotta come back tomorrow? What's your number? 631-833-9679? Oh, stop writing me a ticket.
Welcome back to Talk with Terra. I am Terra Renee from African American Women in Cinema, and today we're talking with the groundbreaking filmmaker, Mr. Terrence Gordon, and he's talking to us about his journey, what brought him into filmmaking. And Mr. Terrence, could you talk about the recent documentary that you made on Mr. Versace?
Yeah, certainly. I met Alfredo Versace in, let's see, I hope I get my years correct. I think it was 2007, I believe, 2008. I used to go out to the American Film Market in Santa Monica, California, because I was, at that point, it was post NYU. I done a bunch of commercials and music videos and shot some short films, and I started to find my own sense of style and in terms of being a filmmaker, finding my own voice. And I was in development for a film called Between Heaven and Earth, and that was a journey unto itself in terms of getting it done, trying to raise money. That's where I met Keith David, because I had cast Keith David and Linda Carter, the original Wonder Woman. And we were talking to, I believe it was Kerry Washington's agents for her, but she didn't accept it. But anyways, I was on that journey doing that, as well as another film called Psychosis. And those films never got made, but I spent a considerable amount of time trying to get them done for the writers. And I'd gone out to the American Film Market, met these producers that I became friends with. And one of those people was Ed Meyer, or Fred Ed Meyer. Yes. And so Ed one day called me a few years later and said, "Hey, would you be interested in making a film for a friend of Alfredo Versace's?" And it was, I think, La Traviata. And I said, "Yeah, certainly." And I mean, like, of course. I mean, it's Versace, and for me, I just thought Versace's Versace. I didn't, distinguish that, Alfredo Versace versus Johnny Versace or what have you.
Right.
And so once I met him on that project, and that project didn't happen for me, but Alfredo and I became pretty good friends. And in the mix of that, I learned about his story. And I could not believe that I did not know of this story. And so I just started to take a camera, and it was a small DSLR camera that I would have on me, and I would just keep turning it on. And I'm like, this guy has been an incredible designer, an incredible creative that has done so well in the world overseas. And at this point, I'm now starting to distinguish between, the Gianni Versace's and the Alfredo Versace type of boutiques and merchandise and all this stuff. And I'm thinking something here is just not making sense, but he was such a humble individual. And that took me. That how is it someone that makes over 200 million a year will be in my audience as that we can just go hang out and talk, and I can go to his house and he'll cook food, and I'm going to shoot someplace and he's like, hey, can I come along? And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, you can come along, and we started to do a lot of stuff like that. And my manager at the time was Joycelyn Engel, and she was running Steven Spielberg's Children of Chernobyl organization. And she said, could you get Alfredo to make a bag, for the auction for Children of Chernobyl? And, we have all these celebrities there that come and they auction, and we did. And, and he and I went there and with my brother and Jenna and a few other people. And we met all these people like John Voight and Matt Damon, and them came in later, and all the Soprano cast and all these people at the time. And I was just observing from the outside how people were responding to Alfredo Versace. And it was sort of like, you knew the name, you didn't really know the person, you didn't know the person behind it. And no one knew his story. And as I learned about his story and I realized how tragic it was, I said, Alfredo, you need to put this out there, because, what's out there in the world, is not the right perception of who you are. People thinking that you're this fraud. People thinking that you're this guy that came after Gianni Versace. People thinking that you're trying to ride his coattails or something. And none of that was the case, And, so I got to learn about the man. And once I learned about the man, I felt very compelled that I wanted to tell his story. Not for my own gain or for anything other than he's a decent human being with a narrative that can easily go misunderstood in the world. And I just felt, I would like to tell this story and maybe help set the record straight. So that's sort of how that all came about.
Wow, that is amazing. So when you were talking to him about the fact that you wanted to do his story and put his version out in the world, how was his response to that? Well,
just like someone that went to battle and has been wounded and seen a lot of warfare. There's a PTSD factor to it. And, this man has been through the ringer, dragged through the media. He's been, the court cases, the extortion from others, so for him, it wasn't sort of like, yeah, Terrence, go ahead and do this. It wasn't that response. It was sort of like, I don't know. I'm just getting from under this cloud. I've accepted, what has been. I've lost the rights to my name, and I can't use it. So, so he was not very, very open to it. However, when I would turn my camera on, he was happy to talk. Because it's just between us. So he would just he'll converse and we'll speak. And I realized that in some ways I felt like I was being like therapy because he was finally getting a way to kind of get it out of his system. And there was some anger there, which is understandable. I mean, imagine someone telling you after you've amassed and built a certain amount of wealth that you cannot use your name, that people counterfeited your products overseas outside of your control, and you get blamed for it. And you spend hundreds of millions of dollars in legal fees defending what's yours, right? And still in the end, lose it all because others had more power, money, and visibility. And there's the optics of it. And that has been, his demise in that sense. So he wasn't very receptive per se, but, with, for instance, when we met and I was telling you about it, and which is just kind of crazy how it sort of just kind of came back, because I took that footage, I shot it, and I just kind of left it on hard drives and, sort of forgot about it. Well, not really forget about it, but I wasn't certain that I was going to be able to do anything with it. I sort of just needed to document because I just felt compelled that this should be recorded. And so that's what I did. And, and when I was talking to you about that and some others, and you're like, well, yeah, you should go ahead and do it. And me thinking that you're saying, that you're going to help me with this kind of thing, even though you were just being a good Samaritan and just saying, hey, run with that. That just kind of led me down. I was like, okay, great. I got somebody to be able to do this with. And, so let's go do it again. And then that's when I brought it back up to him saying, that I've met someone from the African American Women in Cinema and we were talking about this stuff and she'll help me with this thing. And it shows how sometimes we hear what we want to hear, not necessarily what somebody said. You know what I mean? And but I'm glad that I heard it the way I did, because because otherwise I probably would not have ended up making it. And of course we hit some roadblocks there, and thankfully Transmedia, Tom from there encouraged Alfredo to not shut it down, because there was two other feature films that were going to be made about him, and he sort of shut those down. And he was just worried more from a legal standpoint, I think, and also again just saying, do I really want to bring all of this stuff up again and deal with it? But I must say that after he saw the draft of it, after he saw the draft of the film, he said, he's like, yeah, he's glad that he told his story. I think in some ways he felt that at least people are going to know the truth, at least from his perspective.
That is incredibly amazing. And we'll be right back after these messages. You listen to Talk with Terra, presented by African American Women in Cinema, right here on Rudy Radio.
Hi, I'm Dan O'Shea, Executive Director for Maureen's Haven Homeless Outreach. It is our mission to support the homeless in our community. We provide an emergency winter shelter program, a day center, and support services to help the homeless in our community. With your help, we can continue to provide services so critically needed to the homeless in our community. Please visit www.maureen'shaven.org or call us at 631-727-683.
I am Madame Francois, and I'm introducing my new luxury skincare brand that's available to you at an attainable price. Discover my beauty secrets, luxurious, effective ingredients with proven results and a price tag that doesn't break the bank. Come indulge with me at lesmadamefrancois.com.
Welcome back to Talk with Terra. I am Terra Renee from African American Women in Cinema, and today we're talking with filmmaker, documentarian, director, producer, Mr. Terrence Gordon. And he was just sharing with us the journey to the making of the Versace documentary. Mr. Gordon, it's amazing, Terrence, how as you begin that journey, things begin to evolve and just begin to just go a certain path. And what I saw was that little by little, Mr. Versace began to trust you. And that was big. And based on, what you were saying about his experience already, what he had to endure and the PTSD, I understand that. It reminded me of the time when we screened a documentary about the icon, Miss Winnie Mandela. And the director, after it was over, it was an incredible documentary. And after it was over, the director was asked, with all that Winnie went through, she was constantly being set up by her enemies. They were just trying to ensnare her, discredit her, anything that they could do. It was a lot of psychological warfare that she had endured. And so they asked the director, how did you get Miss Winnie to trust you? And so I always find that interesting when there is a documentary about someone who is really on a global stage, but yet endured so much psychological, just all types of hardship. When did you notice, Mr. Versace? I think you've already said it, but if you could just hone in on the first time you noticed that you had his trust in making this film.
I think that when you think about the trust with Alfredo, I'm assuming that, and maybe one day we'll try to have him on here and have him, give that great version because we all tell ourselves a story in our head, and not necessarily means that is the story that actually took place with someone else, right? But I do believe that over time, he's watching me operate. He's watching me do certain things. I was in the middle of shooting another project for a friend or a colleague that I had met through the National Police Defense Foundation. And she's a psychologist dealing with a lot of her own situation. And I was documenting some of her journey and what she was doing and going through. And she's Italian and he's Italian. And so, he came on a few of those shoots with me. I think sometimes people are just, and I believe it's because he's a creative. And one of the things I've learned from Alfredo is that he can be creating anything, not just designing clothes and shoes as he did for Pablo Gucci and all these people. He, as long as he's creating, he's happy. And I think maybe he was looking at me as being a creative in terms of media and film, and or maybe he was just interested in the process. I'm not sure exactly where in that, but I do feel that people can tell your character of who you are very quickly. And I was able to tell his, and I think he was able to tell me. And I try to be transparent at every corner. And I've never abused my friendship with him in any way. And so I felt like he felt that he can trust me. And also, I think that at the end of the day, we all have a story, every last one of us.
True.
True. We would want to tell it to someone, no matter how introverted we are, or, and I think because I constantly kept asking questions, because I just could not ask questions, after learning, who this person was and trying to understand what this world might be, some of the folks that I would have loved to have spoken to more, like Barbara Ross, that was in the documentary. And, Barbara Ross is a very, influential, interior designer that's done for the likes of people like Barbara Streisand and all these individuals, and, lived in a certain level of wealthy. And, I remember going to a premiere that her son had done on a movie called Downloading Nancy. And we went with Alfredo and some of her friends, a lot of these oil tycoons. And having conversations with these people and realize that, this is the status level that he operated on, that, his friends are multi-billionaaires, not millionaires, but billionaires. That these are some of the people that he would be around. And the very surprising thing that I did appreciate about all of them is you could not tell that these individuals were that unless someone told you. I mean, they were very simple. They were very kind-hearted. They were, they spoke about their G5 jets, but, but it was just interesting for me, at least as a filmmaker, as a documentarian, to be able to watch this. And I know we didn't have them in the film, but we had Barbara Ross and just a wonderful lady and individual. But her character of who she is and her connection with Alfredo, you can kind of tell the type of people that he gravitated to. And so I think when it came to me, I think I was transparent as well. I didn't have an agenda, and at least my agenda was known to him, and in the sense that, Alfredo, someone needs to tell your story, because the world needs to get it right. Because what you see on the internet and what you see in the court papers and what you see outside is all skewed in a very different way. But what is your story from your perspective? What would you want to tell the world about this? Why is it that this man did not want to commit suicide after the atrocities that have been put against him? And so that intrigued me. And I think also for him, it was just like, this person wants to tell my story. I can trust them, So I think it's a little bit of that. But again, you may have to talk to Alfredo to understand why, because I never really thought about it very much, because I'm also always very transparent. I don't keep an agenda with anyone. And so for me, it's, I just figure, well, you should trust me because I'm trustworthy. but that might be arrogant, but it's just that I just did not have a hidden agenda. I always kept it, above par that way.
Wow, that's amazing. I know this was one of the highlights in your filmmaking career. Can you share any other highlights that you have?
Well, I think, and Terra, also thanks to you, because, doing the Marion Williams project, and learning about her life, and, even though I didn't direct that one, but produced on it, and, and I'm hoping the world gets to see that story as well, because there's so many of these incredible icons that are out there that, that just need platform. And, it's up to us as filmmakers to take that responsibility of telling these stories, whether it's in a documentary form or whether it's in a scripted narrative form. I've, we're in a tough business. This industry is a tough, very tough type of job choice. There's so many other ways in which one can be able to do, but I think us as storytellers just have to tell the stories. And so I think the Marion Williams, I'm really excited about that film. The Versace one getting out, that I produced on independent feature, Prime of Your Life, that I believe is on Amazon now, I think. And or Netflix, when you used to be able to get CDs or DVDs, and another one called Hermaphrodita, which I had produced on, which deals with hermaphrodites in the Dominican Republic, and is based on somewhat of a true story to some extent. And For Michelle, which is another film I did, I produced and direct, that tells a story of one guy's journey when he finds out that he had a daughter that he didn't know existed, and when her mom passed away, he tried to take claim, to take her, to take custody, but then falls in love with a social worker, and I did that film as an experimental film, and the one thing, and I say it's experimental because I made it up as I went along.
Wow.
And many people didn't know that. But, I had just come out of a slump of of several meetings with, we were doing some stuff. I think it was with Lionsgate, Universal, and another friend's production company that sort of was going around in a circle for quite some time. And I just said, I'm a filmmaker. I need to be making films. And so I contacted a few of my friend actors in New York, and I said, come down to the Carolinas where I am now. We're making a film. And I don't have time to write an entire script for 6 months. But here's the premise of what I'm thinking. Here's what we have access to. Let's make a story. And, and then I did that, and, it took 2 years of my life. And, it's finally in wide release on Amazon Prime. And, not a perfect film. But the one thing I would say is in everything that I've done in filmmaking, whether it's commercials, whether it's music videos, and I did a ton of those, or whether it was in the feature films, whether producing or directing, I've learned something from each and every project about myself as a filmmaker. And what I try to do is just be a student of it all and just try to make sure that the next one's going to be better. And what is it that I have as a strength within that storytelling? So, they always say, you just need 2 or 3 good scenes in any movie to, and I've always had that in every single, even right back to the very first one, Avatar: Life After Addiction, and I learned so much from it. And so although that won't be a milestone film to, let's say, the audience or the public or whoever, for me as an individual, as a storyteller, I learned what I liked and what I didn't like. I learned what resonates with me from a storytelling perspective. I learned, what kind of shot angles, what kind of cinema language I like in terms of doing it. And sometimes it's frustrating when you don't have the budget or the resources sometimes to execute the vision the way that you would want to, but you have it in your head. And sometimes you get to put a part of that and see how people respond to it. And, so I think in terms of milestones, I feel like every time I do a piece of work, for me personally, it's a milestone because I know what it takes to get it out there. And so every bit of them. So there's quite a bit of milestones.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good. And, you're absolutely right. A lot of people don't understand what it takes to get there. Can you share some of the behind of scenes? You could just think of one of the most, I want to say dramatic, attention getting story that you can tell us behind the scenes, but we'll be right back after these messages. You're listening to Talk with Terra, presented by African American Women in Cinema, right here on Rudy Radio.
The COVID-19 pandemic has changed our lives, but one thing that hasn't changed is the need for routine vaccinations. Vaccine-preventable diseases like measles, flu, and pneumonia haven't gone away and can cause serious illness. Protect yourself, your family, and those around you by staying current with routine vaccinations. Talk to your healthcare professional and stay up to date on all recommended vaccines. Learn more at www.nfid.org.
Welcome back to Talk with Terra. I am Terra Renee from African American Women in Cinema. And today we're talking with filmmaker Mr. Terrence Gordon. And he is going to share with us some of the experiences that can take place, or some filmmakers experience, in making their dream come true. Terrence, please tell us.
Okay. Well, I gotta tell you, experiences, God, there's just so many of them, Terra, so many of them. And like I said, and the reason for that is because everyone, like I said before the last break, was that everyone is somewhat of a milestone, and I learned from my own material as much as I learned from someone else's. But I've learned, I guess some of the things that I've learned along the way is relationships.
Yeah.
Relationships are important in terms of working with your cast and crew and being able to set the tone, and also setting boundaries. And I remember working on one project. I'm not gonna name the name of the project, but it was one of my earlier ones, and where the two main characters, they sort of it was an intimate scene that had to be done, but they had a falling out a little bit before that. And it was 4:00 in the morning. I remember we're shooting in New York City, and we had this location. And I remember Nas, the artist, and all his people were in there with their gray Mercedes Benz and their matching gray fur coats and all this stuff. And I have to shoot this scene in this place, and they weren't part of it. They were just like hanging out after party or whatever. And I needed to get them to clear out, which I did. And they're like, "Oh, you guys are shooting a film?" I was like, "Yeah, we're shooting a film and stuff." And they're like, "All right, we're out." And they packed up their stuff, and the whole entourage left and left the restaurant for us. And but we had the production put together, but I couldn't get my protagonist and antagonist. Well, she wasn't the antagonist; she was the supporting character, and the protagonist to do this because they had a little bit of a falling out before. And so there was no kissing happening on this particular scene when everything was centered around this. And I said, I'm going to set boundaries next time when things happen, because it's important that, that there's a certain amount of distance that's kept, because you can shut a production down in the midst of that. And that can cost you time and money and resources. And, so things like that can come up and happen, and sometimes you get so absorbed, when, I had mentioned Judith Weston, just a really incredible teacher, a mentor, and, I stay in touch with her every year. And, she wrote The Director's Intuition, which is just a phenomenal book. I think any filmmaker should read that book. And I studied that book, and I actually credit most of what I know in filmmaking to her, and also to Mark Travis, who's also a great teacher and author. And Travis has the Travis method in directing, and but anyways, Judith, in one of her workshops, I had met a gentleman by the name of Joe Rubin, and I didn't know who he was at the time. And I remember us being at lunch, and because the workshop went for lunch and everybody went together, and I was speaking with Joe Rubin, and I'm like, I just finished making this short film, or a 45-minute film, and and I was doing this and this, and I think I had directed some music videos at the time. So we're exchanging that, and I'm like, so what are you working on? And he's like, well, I just finished doing, and this was before The Forgotten. It wasn't The Good Son. He had directed The Good Son, The Forgotten, he directed Money Train, he directed Sleeping with the Enemy. He directed all these big movies. I had no idea that he directed these things. Because he's in a workshop with me. We're partnered as director partners, and we're going through these exercises, right? And he's an older gentleman, and I'm thinking, well, maybe he just got into filmmaking late. And so we're talking. And then he was talking about just finishing this film, but didn't do well. And so, I went home and I looked up the stuff, and I was like, oh, he directed all these films. A lot of my favorite films, this guy directed, and I didn't realize it. And so now I got on his radar, because now I need to learn from this guy. And I'm thinking, why are you in this workshop? And, you're learning the same thing I'm learning. Like, what's going on here, right? And he always said that, he's like, a good director's always learning. And you always, so even though he was a Hollywood A-list filmmaker by all standards, I mean, I don't think any of his films made it under $60 million. And I learned that, and I said, if someone like this at that stage at this level is still learning, then I need to always be learning. Don't ever think you know it all, you know? And so I sort of continue down that journey of always trying to learn from my own work as well as others. And you know, and I share that story as not so much a behind the scenes, but in a sense it is, because right after that he went and he did the Forgotten with Julianne Moore, and and I remember calling him up and saying, you know, Joe, I was like, you know, did you use the stuff we learned? You know, because I saw New York Times complaining that you underutilized Julianne Moore, and I remember getting into a big argument with some guys in Hollywood Video Store because they were renting the movie, and they were like, "Oh, this movie sucks," and I'm like, "The movie doesn't suck." You know, and they're like, well, of course it sucks. It changes theme in the middle of the thing. And I took it so personal because I knew the filmmaker and I knew what he went through to make it, that I felt like I had to defend his position. And I realized that, you know, it's subjective. Film is a very subjective medium. And the fact that you'll see it one way and I'll see it another way doesn't make it a bad movie. It just means that we see it in two different perspectives.
Right.
And, you know, and when I called up Joe Rubin, you know, the filmmaker, and he's like, Terrence, I don't have time to use all those things. You know, those things take time and stuff, and, you know, money's on the table, and you know, production's got to move, and, you know, and I thought to myself, okay, you know, so even though we learned these certain tool sets that would just be incredible to work with an actor, you don't always get a chance to employ them, because there's other things that are outside forces when you're making a film that have nothing to do with your ability to execute that you cannot control. And at the end of the day, it all shows up on screen, but you don't always have the control over how everything's going to come out on your film. Right, you know, so whether it's the two actors don't want to kiss because they're having a bad time, or whether it's, you know, you underutilize, you know, a big star because you didn't have the time to delve into character and extrapolate it, or what have you. Whatever the case may be, there's a lot of different forces happening, and it's also one of the reasons why, you know, I feel for myself, it's like, you know, having smaller crews, having, you know, a lot more tighter knit on control of the environment and what's taking place in front of you would give you closer results to what you need. And, you know, many a times it's also, you know, sometimes lack of resources. You know, I'll give you a quick story on this. Was not a feature film, but this was a music video. I was directing a music video for Chad Height, he's a Jamaican artist that had come to the US, and we had rented out China Club in New York City, and I don't know, must have had like 80 people in there, and we're shooting, and and my cinematographer's, you know, doing his thing, and we ran out of media.
Now, my Lord.
What happens when you run out of media on your camera and you're only halfway through the music video that people paid for, and and you got 80 people inside of a club and you're shooting, you know? And I remember us taking out our iPhones, and we started to shoot with them as though we were shooting, you know, just like the shooting behind the scenes or something with it, right? While the cinematographer kept the camera up on his shoulder. And we took it and we edited the pieces in, because we couldn't let anybody know that we ran out of media on the camera, right? Because I mean, that will not be good. So I feel like being able to improvise quickly on the spot when the pressure is on you, sometimes you have to do that. And a lot of the time it's not so much about, you know, all the equipment you have. And I mean, I shoot on the Red camera now a lot, and you know, that's my favorite camera to use, but it's not so much about all the equipment as it is just having vision for what you're doing and being able to think on your feet, you know, and to be able to do mental exercises so that when it's time to execute and you have to restage something or rework something, that you're able to do that, you know, and building very strong relationships with the people that you're working with, you know, so that they trust you and you can trust them. And so I feel like those are some of the things that along the way for myself that, behind the curtain of filmmaking, whether it's a commercial, a music video, a documentary, or a scripted narrative, that, for me, it's all the same, in terms of storytelling. Can I use a certain camera angle? Can I use certain cinema language within it? So I believe that, behind those curtains, those are some of the things that I think I can, those are the ones that stand out for me.
Wow. Well, I tell you, I don't know where the time went, but they're telling me that we have to go. Thank you so much for listening to Talk with Terra. I'm Terra Renee from the African American Women in Cinema Organization. You can visit us at www.aawic.org. You can also follow us on Instagram and Twitter and like us on Facebook. Mr. Terrence, is there social media that folks could follow you on that you have? And thank you so much for your words of inspiration and encouragement today. Really appreciate that. How can folks follow you?
Thank you again. Yeah, absolutely. I'm on Facebook, but I don't use it very often. I tend to use Instagram. So TNGDIR, and that's Tango November Golf Delta Indigo Romeo. TNGDIR. You can find me there on Instagram. I also have Youthful Ambition, which is at Youthful Ambition YA. That's also an Instagram account. But for me directly, it's just TNGDIR. I think that's the easiest way. And I appreciate you having me on here. And Rudy, I think, I wish you much success with this radio program and on what you're doing. I think African American women is doing so much great stuff. And I'm looking forward to continue to watch that growth within this organization. I think you're doing a great thing with it.
Well, thank you so much, Terrence. And certainly having people like you on board means all the difference in the world. Talk with Terra is made possible by Rude Rangers Entertainment. Our creative director is Rudy J. Breedy. Please don't forget to like and share this episode with as many people as possible. We sincerely appreciate you joining us today and wish you continued peace, blessings, and prosperity. See you next episode.